and welcome to another edition of the Collapse Cafe here at the Doomstead Diner. Um, in this discussion, we will be talking about energy and electric vehicles, the geopolitical situation, and just be a bit of a freestyle here. And I encourage all users, if you got the time, to check us out on the Chasing the Squirrel, which is part of the Doomstead Diner. We've got a forum there that anyone can join, and we've got like lots of good discussions, and we're always welcome to any newcomers to come. All right, with that out of the way, I'm just going to open up with the topic that's been on the news a lot, and it's something that's worth talking about, and that's about electric vehicles. And, there's a lot of things going on about introducing electric vehicles and, more importantly, making them the only types of vehicles that are available around 2030 in most countries. It varies, give and take 5 years. And I've personally got my misgivings slightly about the EVs. I think their benefits have been overstated, but that's just my opinion. But I'll be interested to hear what your opinion in general to the whole transition from EV, like oil-driven cars, to electric-driven cars. And just for this moment, just to focus on the cars, and we'll talk about the trucks perhaps a bit later on. What are your opinions?
Well, the need to go for electric cars is pretty apparent. It's a question of going as carbon free with all of our energy needs as we possibly can. And the use of gasoline for cars and diesel for trucks is a huge contributor to the amount of carbon dioxide we're emitting every year. And that, of course, is linked to climate change. And so the need is fairly well established and fairly well agreed on by most reasonable people that we need to reduce our dependencies on basically the thermal generation of energy by burning stuff, because that has the waste product of carbon dioxide. No matter what you burn, you're going to produce carbon dioxide pretty much. So electric cars is a big part of that. And as a result, going back to 20 years or so now, the auto companies and entrepreneurs like Elon Musk recognized that that was going to happen at some point. And so they went about designing and building electric cars to replace the current fleet of ICE, which is internal combustion engine, ICE vehicles, and use them instead for our transportation needs. And so that whole development phase took a while, and then you saw for a while hybrids, which had small motors that generated electricity, which then went to batteries, and then the batteries then ran the car through electric motors. And so the battery packs were smaller because they didn't have to store all the energy. A lot of the energy for a hybrid car gets stored in the tank of gas. And the first 50 miles or so with those, you can go on just the batteries, and then the electric motor will kick in. So if you're just doing short trips, you can be all electric, and you're not putting any CO2 into the atmosphere. But as soon as the motor kicks in to keep the batteries charged up, then it's going to be emitting just as much CO2 as a regular ICE engine. And then there's efficiencies to be dealt with in terms of there's loss all along the way in the conversion the motor heat or motor energy that's burning in the motor to store it as electricity, and electricity goes into a magnet to turn it back into mechanical energy. So each way along there, you get some loss. And in the end, hybrid cars, they have a better gas mileage or better fuel efficiency than a straight ICE vehicle, but it's not that huge an improvement once the motor starts to kick in. Most of the improvement you get from them is from that first 50 miles or so where you're just operating on the batteries. And so if you've charged the car up from a source, like your house or something like that, or a charging station, where you got the electricity from a non-carbon burning source, then that would be the whole cycle is non-carbon. But that doesn't happen very much. But what they were really going for was an entirely non-carbon based battery or car, and would need battery packs that were big enough to take the car the kind of distance that we are used to traveling in regular internal combustion engine vehicles, which has usually been about 300 miles or so on a tank of gas. And they also designed the cars to be of the same type of specifications that we have. In other words, we do the same kind of speeds, highway speeds of 65 miles an hour, and have the same general cargo capacity, number of people in them, comfort, so forth. So a modern electric car that, say, Tesla makes, an EV, or Mercedes, or any of the other companies that are making them, for the most part, they look on the outside like an internal combustion engine vehicle. But they're run entirely with battery packs. And that's problems with them. Well, you got a question there? Or?
No, it's just it was breaking up. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's where the problems come in, because even though there's been a lot of progress with battery technology, they take a while to charge up. And so the charging stations that you have for them, if it's just your household electric outlet, that's only producing about 20 amps of current at 120 volts. And with those, to fully charge up a electric vehicle that's going to range a mile, well, I don't know the exact figures, but it's pretty much all night. You know, you're going to have to charge it like, 10 hours or so to get that thing from zero to fully charged again. Then they have a next level of charger, which is like a level 3 charger, I think they call it. And that basically is like the washing machine circuit that you have in your house that'll run your washer and dryer. And those are, I think they're 220 volt, 30 amp circuits. And a circuit like that, well, that's going to be putting out basically 4 times as much energy each second that a regular household outlet will do. So what would take 10 or 12 hours to do now only takes 3 hours, say, on an enhanced outlet. And then I think at the big supercharging stations, they might have even more powerful ones. I don't think they go over 220 volts, but I think they'll go up as much as a 50 amp circuit. So you might get it down to an hour and a half or so to charge the car. But that's still a whole lot longer than it takes to fill a tank of gas, which is only about 5 minutes, right, when you stop. And so that's, a big difference for people who do a lot of long trips and have longer commutes or go on vacations and that sort of thing. So that's a big downside. And then there's the biggest problem of all is the fact that there aren't many of these charging stations that are outside the major metropolitan areas. The whole network that we have now of gas stations and convenience stores, and I mean, you don't have to drive more than 10 or 20 miles anywhere in the country to find some place to gas up. Okay, so no matter where you are, where you go, you're going to always be able to gas up your car. But once you get outside of the major metros with a EV, it's almost impossible, or it becomes very difficult to find stations. And you can get yourself to a point where your charge is running down. The closest charging station is maybe 50 miles away or whatever. And so you point your car in that direction and you get there and you find the charging station is broken. It's not producing juice. What do you do now? And that whole problem has basically made the EVs that are currently on the market not good value and not workable for the rent-a-car industry. All right, Hertz bought, I think when a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, they went big into EVs and bought like 20,000 Teslas. And 3 years later, which is the usual cycle on a rent-a-car, they want to get rid of all of them because of the problems they've been having with renting them. And in trying to get rid of them and sell them on the used market, the way they auction off their vehicles, they're finding that difficult because the resale value also is much lower than a comparable ICE car. So all these things have made the economics and possibilities for using electric cars as a substitute to be, not working real well. And so the question is, can those goals of an all-electric automobile fleet be met by 2030 or 2035 or whatever it is? And it doesn't look like that's really possible at this point. I mean, realistically speaking, it's now that's not what the media or people who are set on climate change and set on the idea that we have to reduce emissions want you to hear. But I don't see how that transition can be made. Unless all of a sudden, over the next 5 years, a whole big network of charging stations is built all over the country. But to do that, you'd have to upgrade our electric grid. The way electricity is supplied to all of these places outside of the major metro areas. The further out you get, the less electricity around there is. You got a question?
Yeah, just to go back. Yeah, just to go back to that, because one of the comments, sorry to interrupt, was quite interesting when you mentioned about the cars not having a a resale value, because one of the major arguments I hear against electric vehicles is their affordability or lack thereof. I mean, in the UK, for example, I think in 2023, they said the average UK electric vehicle is around £50,000, which is, I guess, like, I'm just trying to think, was $70,000. And, you think about average Joe who's struggling with a 10-year-old car. How are they going to afford it? And then the other question on top of it is, why was there no demand for the used, why is the used, I've heard it before, where the used car market for electric vehicles is kind of almost non-existent. What's causing this lack of demand, and can you see any sort of scenario where it could be affordable in the next 10 or 15 years, these EVs?
Well, I think the reason why the used market is broken is it goes, starting with the original price of it. The only people that bought those cars at the beginning, which are cost, as you say, $70,000, and those are the cheap ones. Okay, they go up from there. I think there are a few that are, $35,000, $40,000 range, but not too many models like that from any of the companies that are producing them. So they're all up there in the $60,000, $70,000 range, mostly. So the people that bought those cars are well-to-do people. I won't say they're, the 0.1 percenters, but they're, upper middle class people, which to be upper middle class these days, you got to be making well into the six figures, $150,000, $200,000 a year. $75,000 is considered middle class, and I don't think that's, you can maintain a real middle class lifestyle anymore on that. But at any rate, so the people who are buying these to begin with have a pretty high income relative to the population as a whole. So that's a fairly small market. Those people who bought that original round, you saturated that market. So 3 years later, there's not many people around to buy that will buy new ones. Okay. And then when they sell them off, or a rental car company sells off those cars as a used vehicle, those people who bought new ones, they don't buy used cars. If they're going to stick with EVs, they sell their old EV and then they buy another brand new EV. All right. So they're not going to be a market for the used ones. The only people who are going to buy used EVs are the people who have a lower income level. All right. Who are, say, maybe around $100,000 a year, or just middle class at $75,000. So they can then, if you knew you bought the Tesla for $60,000 and in very good condition, 3 years later on the used market, that Tesla sells for, say, I don't know, 35,000 or so, a little over half price. Let's just, throw that out there. Well, that person who's buying it, even if it's in very good condition, has a choice. You buy that used $35,000, or for that same price at this time, you can buy a brand new internal combustion engine car that has equivalent performance abilities as the electric that's of that age. And then on top of that problem is the fact that a 3-year-old Tesla or any electric vehicle doesn't have the same battery capacity that it did when it was brand new. The battery degrades over a period of time. I think the lifespan on those battery packs is 5 or 6 years. Depends on how many charging cycles it's been through and so forth. And then what kind of weather it's been in, because repeated cold cycles of cold weather, warm weather, cold weather, that also affects battery chemistry and battery life. So all those things can kill the battery. So when you buy a used vehicle like that, you're probably going to have to replace the battery pack pretty soon. And people who buy used cars, well, they don't want to get just 2 or 3 years out of it. I mean, I bought used cars my whole life. I got 10 years out of my cars. And so there isn't a real good used market for them. The new market for them is a very limited market because the people have to be making a lot of money. And then if they're not workable for the rental car companies who buy them in big fleets, who's going to buy them? All right. And there's where the economic problem is. Even though you may want that type of car and need that type of car because of the climate problems and the need to be non-carbon, it just doesn't work economically. And if you can't make it work economically, you can't do the transition. At least not that way with that type of vehicle. And that's where the real mistake is. The real mistake with EVs has been in trying to replace on a sort of pure basis the same type of vehicle as we have with internal combustion engine. But because of the energy demands, it's just not feasible economically, and not feasible in terms of our infrastructure of charging stations. So the wrong type of electric vehicles have been chosen. And that's not to say that there isn't a right way, or at least a better way, which there is. I can talk about that too if you want.
Yeah, no, it's this is like the issue, because I think the other question it sort of begs out of it is, if it's like a limited lifespan of 6 years or so, give or take a few years, what's the prospect of recycling or reusing these batteries? Because part of the issue is, yes, they emit less CO2 during their working lifespan, but part of the issue is in the production side of the EV. It takes more energy to produce an electric vehicle than it does to produce a standard internal combustion engine. So if you're coming and saying people are only going to use it for 3 to 4 years, the energy impact from the production becomes a much bigger part of its footprint than if the car were to last 10 years. So that's a real issue, because at least on the affordability side, I don't know if this is like a thing in America, but I know in the UK now, one of the popular means is like PCP finance, personal contract purchase, where you basically kind of rent the car for 3 years or so. And if you can afford it, you pay like a lump sum at the end to own the car. Otherwise, you just give the keys back to the dealer and you get a new car. So you can kind of sidestep at least a little bit the initial outlay. But if there's no secondhand market, that's the problem. So 2 questions here. Do you think they can find a way of reusing these easily? And then second of all, what would you think is the best type of battery that they could use for these cars?
Yeah, the battery problem, there's many layers to it. When you talk about the embedded energy in the car and production, a lot of that is in the initial production of the battery, which it has to be the chemical is usually lithium-ion chemistry now, almost exclusively lithium-ion chemistry, although there are other chemistries that can be used. And so all that mining for that stuff, well, that takes a lot of energy, which is usually done with heavy equipment that's powered by diesel. And so that production part of it burns a lot. So the more of those batteries you have to produce, the more carbon you emit from the production of it. Besides the carbon, there's also other environmental impacts of mining for those things. Mining for anything where you have to extract it as a raw ore and then refine it down. Well, when you refine it down, what do you do with all the waste product that you get out of the refining? So, and everybody can just picture in your minds the strip mines that you've seen over the years that are mining for all sorts of other things, whatever it was, coal or iron or whatever. They basically just scrape away the topsoil and dig to the land, and it leaves you a big, ugly pit at the end. And so mining has huge environmental impacts besides the carbon footprint of it. So you do that initial mining, and then the battery goes into the car, and it lasts, let's say, 6 years or 7. I don't think you're going to get more than 7 years out of any of those batteries, at least not if you're using your car, on a daily basis. Maybe if the car sits in the garage, a little old lady's car, and you only use it to go shopping on the weekends, it'll last longer. But as a regular daily vehicle, I don't think you get more than that out of it. So what you do at the end of that time, you got two choices. Well, no, you really only have one choice. You have to get an entirely new battery pack. So that entirely new, that's almost like buying a new car, except just the battery pack. So you don't have to pay for the stuff around it. But the battery pack, well, those by themselves cost, I don't know, $7,000, $8,000. I don't know exactly what the cost is, but it's a pretty healthy amount. So when you say you're gonna, as long as you want to keep that car alive for, say, the whole 10 years that you would expect out of a used vehicle, you're going to have to buy a new battery for it. You're going to have to add that cost of the embedded, making that second battery pack into the carbon cost for the car, the overall carbon cost for running that car for 10 years, plus the environmental impact of not one, but two battery packs. That second battery pack, well, it may not have to come entirely from brand new mined lithium. The old packs can be taken back and remanufactured, broken down, and the elements, chemical elements, separated, refined, cleaned up, and they can make a new battery, just the same, in a similar fashion, not the same, to what happens when you recycle a lead acid battery. Okay, you bring it back, and the electrodes are all wore out and whatnot, but the chemicals are all still in the battery. It just won't take a charge anymore. And they bring it to a recycling center, and the chemicals are all taken out. They're all separated out, broken down again. Energy is put into it to remanufacture the battery, and they put it back together, and you have essentially a new battery made out of the same stuff that the original battery was made out of. So that doesn't take new mining, but it does take a fairly large energy cost to do the remanufacture of the battery. So there is that energy. Either way, it's going to cost the consumer, though, at the end consumer, the same amount of money for the battery pack, whether it was from new lithium or from recycled, from old batteries. It's going to just be what the cost of a new battery pack is for your vehicle. So you've got that cost, and everybody who's buying a new or a used vehicle, I think, knows that they have to do that. They're going to have to do that. And so they have to factor that cost into their head when they buy it. Yeah, today, 3 years later, when I pick it up off the lot, the car is operating pretty much the way it did when it was brand new, but there's 3 years on that battery pack, and so it's only got another 3 or 4 to go before it needs a new one. And so they have to factor that in to their decision and the total cost of the vehicle. It's not just the $35,000 they put down on it; it's the cost of a new battery pack 3 or 4 years later. If they're going to get, reasonable amount of mileage out of a used car. And like I said, for myself, 10 years out of a used car was what I basically tried to get out of all of them. I had, over the course of my car owning career, I had, I think, 3, maybe 4 cars that lasted that long. And some of them overlapped with each other because there were periods of time where I had 2 of them at the same time. So that was, but I only bought a brand new car once, way back when I was married. And it was just the stupidest decision of my life to buy a new car. All of my cars, I never paid more than $5,000 for a used car. And, one of them I got for $1,500, lasted me 10 years. So, when I looked at people who were paying $25,000, $30,000 for a car and had payments, $200-$300 a month every month their whole lives, I just, said to myself, what a waste of money, basically for your ego and whatnot. I mean, all my cars were just as good transportation as, the best Mercedes on the lot. So I just, pride, ego, keeping up with the Joneses, consumer mentality and whatnot, show you're successful.
Conspicuous consumption.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, $5,000, it seems like hard to imagine that electric vehicles could get that cheap ever. But one of the other...
See, now that's the part that is where the mistake is, okay? Because $5,000 cars, used cars that I bought, no, you'll never be able to buy cars, electric cars, used or new, in that price range. Not of this type of configuration. The thing that had the wrong assumption that's made is that we can continue to use those amounts of energy and have cars that are the same size with same performance characteristics and so forth as our current fleet. But the fact is we can't use that much energy. We can't have conspicuous consumption of energy, but we can have $5,000 electric vehicles, and they exist. There are plenty of them. I've seen at least 20 to 30 different models, and they're almost all made in China or Europe. I'd say I think about there's 20 different Chinese makes. I've seen 10 different European makes, and their size is tiny, and their top speeds are like 35 to 50 miles an hour, and their ranges are like 80 to 100 miles. But for almost all uses around town, even decent length commutes, they would work fine. You could use those type of vehicles if you converted over to them. And a beautiful part of it is because they're so small, it would relieve a lot of traffic congestion. In New York City, for instance, the avenues are set up so that they have 4 lanes of traffic going in one direction, and then there's another lane on each side of parking. So it's actually 6 lanes wide for normal vehicles for the main avenues in the city. And but if you use these electric cars, those 4 avenues would change into 6 right off the bat. So it would be like a 50% increase in your driving. Now, what would happen, of course, is the Jevons paradox, where because there was more space, more people would start to use it, and it would fill up again. But at least to start with, it would give you a lot more room on the road and reduce congestion. And reduced congestion would mean reduced energy use also, because a lot of your energy use is spent sitting in traffic. So if we go smaller, go slower, and go less distance culturally by automobile, then yeah, $5,000 cars are possible. But that's the thing that certainly the people who sell cars aren't wanting to do, because the profit isn't there. The same profit that you can get if you sell a $50,000 car. If you say you're taking 10% of the sale of a car, let's say, and that would be generous, it's a way more. Let's say 10% is the profit margin at the end for the manufacturer of the car, and then the profit. Everybody needs to take profit in the chain. People, parts manufacturers, and they, resellers, the car distributor, and then the end salesperson. So there's people taking profits all along the way. But let's say for the manufacturer, it's 10% profit, and the car sells $50,000. Then the manufacturer has $5,000. But if he sells the $5,000 car at 10% profit, manufacturer is only making $500. There's a big difference in profit. The more expensive the car that you sell, the bigger your gross profit's going to be. Might be the same percentage, but the bigger your gross profit. So the incentive is there for the manufacturers to sell the most expensive vehicles they possibly can. And then on the other end, from the consumer end, psychologically, I think consumers really aren't ready to give up the creature comforts of the big cars that we're used to, and the plush seating and the headroom and the arm room and leg room and so forth. When you see these little teeny electric vehicles, and if you go to our website, I put up a couple of the videos that you can find them on Google, of course. Just Google mini EVs, or go to YouTube and Google mini EV cars, and you'll find videos about them. And they come in 3-wheel versions and 4-wheel versions, and they're about 5 feet long and 4 feet wide. And you can just, if you're real small people, you could squeeze 2, like 2 kids next to each other, or 2 really skinny adults can sit next to each other. But usually it's a single seat for the driver in front, and then 2 seats in back, or a good sized seat for a fat person, the typical person. So the vehicles will only take, in general, 1 to 3 people. 4 people would be a real stretch. And they come in 3 and 4-wheel versions. And but then the other advantages besides that, they use a whole hell of a lot less energy. So on your charging circuits, whether it's at home or a charging place outside, they charge much faster. They're only going to take a couple of hours to go from 0 to fully charged again on even a home circuit. So that's the type of car that we should be moving towards and should be sold. But in the United States, you can't find them at all. I mean, you can buy them if you go online and you have them shipped over yourself from China or Europe, but you don't see dealers for them in the United States at all. But they are out there to be purchased. And that's the way we really do have to go in the end. But at least at the current time, it's not happening in the United States.
I'm just trying to imagine these mini electric vehicles sitting beside a massive SUV, and how safe the person in that car is going to feel.
Yeah, that's another. I mean, well, it's not just how you feel; it's the safety question. You know, to be sharing the same road with a car that is, 4,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds of steel, traveling at, even if you say, well, you've reduced the speeds now to 35 to 50 miles an hour, but you're just dead in a collision of any type with a full size vehicle. So yeah, they really can't share the roads very well. You would have to have dedicated lanes for them for as long as you had both types of vehicles on the road. There's no way they could share the same lanes of traffic. Right now, like in places with bike lanes that have bike lanes, they fit on bike lanes nicely. And a lot of places you can use them on the bike lanes as long as you stay below the bike lane limit, which is usually like 15 miles an hour or so. Transitioning to them, and you are allowed to. I mean, in China, places like that, I'd say, the people, first of all, they don't have as many of the big vehicles on the road. And second, they know they can't afford it. They take the risk, It's as simple as that. Just switch them out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be that transition from one type to the other, one size to the other. That there's a safety question there for sure.
Yeah.
No about that.
I think it is a good idea overall, and I think generally speaking, with this type of transition, people need to start thinking outside the box. Not just go for the exact same version that we have, an internal combustion engine to an electric vehicle that looks the same. I think what you say has a lot of merit. And one of the things I always argued about, and it's become more prominent, at least recently, is, after the COVID situation, one of the things that came out of it was things like working from home. I think, governments should probably place a bigger emphasis on that, because then you get people out of their cars. I know not every job you can work from home, but I think a significant number of jobs can be worked from home. And, one of the other ideas that they implement is, like, instead of having a 5-day work week, why don't you have a 4-day work week? So then you just, you decrease the amount of traveling that needs to happen. And if you add the cheap electric vehicles, it's just, these are easy wins, basically. It doesn't cost you a lot of money to do these things. But nobody really is pushing for these things. And I think that in itself is a story. And I think, like you said, it just comes down to who's making the money, and they ultimately drive a lot of what the policy is. And that's partly why I think there's a huge emphasis on electric vehicles, because certain people stand to gain by maintaining what is basically the status quo. But, you're just changing the energy platform from oil and diesel to electric vehicles. That's
it's still the same type of conspicuous consumption of energy. you're just using way more energy than you need for this purpose. The purpose, generally speaking, the transportation of human beings around the society to do the things that they need to do in the society. Their work, their shopping, their all of those necessities. And, and then, there are other things we do for, on the recreational level. And, we have also come to depend upon and use cars as our recreational vehicle. Of course, that's what they call them RVs. And so if people are only going to buy one thing, then they'll buy an SUV, which they can hook a camper to or whatever. And so the thing, basically, and you look at a lot of them, the bigger ones, and they're practically pulling a house with them. And there are RVs that are, like Greyhound buses, okay, diesel pushers. So we have to get out of this idea that our vacationing, our recreation needs to be done by using those type of vehicles. I think, people have to learn that they need to take their vacations more close to home in general, and then you do things like use bicycles and camping with tents, not pull a house with you. Lower energy means of taking time off from work. A vacation does not have to be on kind of the seas ocean liner and putting out as much carbon into the atmosphere as 1,000 or 10,000 cars. You go on vacation and you're burning even more diesel or more carbon than you did when you were driving your car back and forth from work. So that's just ridiculous, and that's what people are doing. So we have to. Those are all things that we give up, and I mean, we can't wean ourselves off a lot of that stuff right away, but a family vacation every year to the Bahamas or Hawaii for everybody, in the middle class population, it's just not going to happen, and then you get into equity problems as well, but to the very rich, still get to do those things, not necessarily with private jets, but even just, okay, we'll still let them fly, but we'll reconfigure the airplanes so that they're all first class, won't have as many flights, and will only service a small percentage of the population. Do we allow that? Is that fair? To have a class of people that has that, those advantages and can burn carbon like that, while the rest of us have to tighten our belts? Is that equity? Is that fair? Those are political and sociological questions that are very, important to answer. And as far as your political leaning, whether you're, you think that it's okay for some people to be rich and other people to be poor, and how rich can you let them be? How much more, is okay? It's okay to be just a little rich? I don't know. I don't know what to, well, I know what my opinions are. My opinions are, no, it's not allowed. And it has to be the same for everybody. If, Joe Sixpack can't fly to Hawaii every year, well, neither can Elon Musk. whether it's in a private plane, private jet, or on a commercial flight. Nobody can. Just not allowed. Maybe you can get a vacation like that once in every 10 years. Everybody gets it, something like that, and you have provision for it. But everybody can't be doing it every year. There's just no way.
So like one question I was going to say, and you kind of touched on it in your last remarks, but I'll just put it in a way, and I'll just say as a preface, like just to make the message somewhat palatable to the average Joe Sixpack. If you were the president of the United States, probably a dangerous thing to put you as president, but let's say you were the president and you weren't assassinated the next day, so you had time to implement your measures. What solutions would you give? And I'm just trying to say, like, offer solutions where you think it would be easier. Not saying it's going to be easier for the public to sort of get behind. I'm talking about the EV type of things, just to be clear.
EVs. Well, I think the first thing to do would be to have a limit or a rationing of the amount of energy that you are allowed to use every week, and so you're going to have to downsize it in some way. So you have effectively gas or electricity rationing. And that would be easy to do these days, with computers and credit cards and so forth, since you're going to be buying your energy with a card. The computer can keep track of how many total watts of energy or joules or BTUs or whatever your unit is that you're going to measure in newtons. Everybody has a cap, and it can be, there can be adjustments to that cap, and that can be identical for everybody, based on certain needs. Something about a person's particular type of job may require that they use more energy, and so forth. And so I think that would encourage more carpooling type stuff and ride sharing while we still have the bigger vehicles, and then have tax credits, and be another policy thing, for buying the much smaller vehicles. Take away the EV tax credits that they give for the big EVs and only apply those to the tiny ones, so that people have motivation, financial motivation, besides the fact they're a whole heck of a lot cheaper to buy the small EVs to begin with. Given that you can buy one for $5,000, if you give a 20% tax credit, that takes $1,000 off. Now you're getting it for $4,000. People could just buy one in addition to the regular ICE car that they have, and then they could just start using it and say, okay, now I'm not going to drive my regular car to work anymore. That's going to stay in the garage, and I'll just use it for when I have to go to grandma's house, who lives 60 miles or 100 miles away. So I'll just use it once a month. Or whatever. I'll just use it when I have a big family outing, and I've got to put 5 people in the car at the same time. But anytime it's just me, or just me and a friend, or me and the kids going somewhere, then we use a little itty bitty car. So it would take a lot of the big ones off the road and start to transition to the small ones. And it would be affordable. It would also make affordable for people who can't currently afford a car at all. They'd actually be able to get a car and be in the market. for it. So I think that would be a way to encourage the transitioning. And then with traffic, once you got it started a little bit, start dedicating a lane of traffic to those vehicles, with a actual, cement boundary between it so that the cars can't just cross over into it, the regular sized cars. Protect the small vehicles. And then as you move along, so if you start with 4 lanes of road going in one direction, well, you cut it down to 3 for the big cars and you leave 1 lane for the little ones. And then after enough people buy them, you cut down the big cars to 2 lanes and 2 for the small cars. But now that's 3 lanes because 2 lanes of regular car size lanes turns into 3 lanes for small car, tiny cars. And then it's down to 1 car for the big ones, and then finally they're gone. So you make that transition over, a few years. So between the financial incentives and the physical incentives and the energy incentives of rationing, I think you can push people in that direction. And I think that would be politically palatable to do it if you could get, a politician who wasn't already bought by the status quo. And I mean, that's almost impossible to find. So, but there are, you can noodle out ways to do it. Whether you can actually find the leaders that'll promote it and then get the sheeple to follow, I don't know. Those are tougher questions.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there'd be a lot of pushback. And I mean, even in the UK, there's pushback, like the electric vehicle sale date, like when you can only buy electric vehicles, has been pushed back to from 2030 to 2035, because I guess it's under the grounds of affordability and enforcement. And, it's already, they're caving now on that. Just
and practicality. The fact of the matter is, with what they're doing now, with the charging of capacity and the electric grid capacity, it's just not possible to make that transition by 2030, or even, in my humble opinion, by 2035, because they're not going to be able to build the grid out, at least here in the United States. The UK is smaller, so maybe, but they're not going to be able to provide the charging stations for the cars all over the country. There's too much space. It's too big. And you got to run wire. You got to run wire and high voltage cables capable of transmitting that much power over too much distance, too much of it, and there's no way it's going to get built in that period of time, not in this country. So, they're caving for a lot of reasons that are strictly political, but also just on a practicality level. I don't think it could be done. Even if everybody was gung ho to do it, I don't think it could be done.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it just makes me wonder, like, how they could do it really. Like, I know as trucks, personally, I think that's pretty much very difficult to do with trucks. But I'm just trying to think, like, could you have overhead cables or some? I know it sounds a bit out there, but like kind of tram type cars, so that if they've have to travel long distances, they can use some sort of cable wire, so they don't have to rely on batteries. Is that an option?
No, it's still, if you're running wires and you still have the transmission aspect to it. I mean, I can envision with the cars, those cars are small enough that you could design rail cars that you could drive your car onto. Okay, like how passengers get on individually onto a train car?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a single train car, if it was configured right, you could drive on probably 20. Let's see if they're 4 feet wide and train car. You'd probably get about 30 of them. You could probably put 30 little mini cars onto what it would be sort of a kind of a flatbed rail car. Okay, but enclose it, and you could have like a hatch that opened up, and the car would drive onto it and sit on the platform. Then the hatch would close, and then the train goes off. So instead of an interstate that goes from one state to the other, you drive out of your central city in your mini car to this rail location and drive your car onto this thing, and then every few hours or so, I don't know how often, would depend on how big the volume, the daily volume was, but every half hour or whatever, one of these trains would take off and go 100 miles to the next stop. And so sort of hybridize the little vehicles with the rail network. That would be one thing you could do. But I don't think running overhead wires, that's the trolley car solution. That's not a feasible option. I don't see that.
I think,
happening.
yeah, probably if you're going to go down that route, you might as well just build out the rail network and have more trains, because that's probably more efficient than trolley cars or what have you. And I think that would probably need to be part of the solution, I think, because trains can get you further, and at least per passenger, it's not going to use as much energy.
Yeah, the problems with, I mean, there are a lot of other problems with trains. The last mile problem is a big problem with trains. The fact that you have the stations X number of miles apart, and then once you're off the train, you got to get from there to whatever it is place that you're going, and depending on how far apart the train stations are, those distances can be pretty good. So unless you actually have a car in the station waiting for you, then you have to have some type of ride share system running in the neighborhood that will shuttle people to and from the train station. And so that runs into a personnel problem, okay, because of all, how many people are using it and how many rideshare cars can you have? So I don't see the, commuter rail, that type of thing. I don't see that as a very practical solution to
Well,
to the
I don't know,
problem.
because if you go back to your idea of the mini electric vehicles, the ones that are like $5,000, I mean, if it's that cheap, surely you could just have a cab that can just shuttle you wherever you need to go. And if they're that cheap, you can cover the final. Yeah.
If they're all what do you call it, autonomous cars, if they're all robot cars, yeah, you could.
Yeah.
But you can't do it if you need drivers. No way. You'd never have the personnel for it. But if you could do it with all autonomous cars. I personally don't like autonomous vehicles. I never put myself in one. This is, a matter of trust, and I know how they work. I mean, damn thing's got to be connected to the internet. What happens if the internet crashes? Your car's going to have to. I mean, I'm sure it has a failsafe that brings it to a stop if it loses its internet connection. But without that, and then I mean, a lot of the guidance features on them, they if you run into mud or so forth, it can cover the sensors and whatnot. There's all sorts of ways that that those things can be damaged, that the self-driving capability will be compromised. Now, I know that to date they've had a pretty decent safety record. Nevertheless, I still wouldn't trim. I don't trust them, and I don't like them on principle. You know? So
Yeah.
But other than self-driving robot cars, no, I don't see a way to do it. Other than, like I said, if the trains themselves could carry the cars, if you could actually go in your car on the train, then yeah, you could do that.
I think ultimately, with any solution, I think people have to probably get used to the idea that they probably won't be traveling as much as they used to. I think that has to be a final, like one of the final endpoints is you just simply.
They won't, but whatever traveling they do or do need to do, they need to be able to do. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, you might say that, okay, you won't be going to work every day anymore. You'll only be going 3 days, but you'll still need a vehicle to do that with, some type of vehicle. And no, I know a lot of people say, well, we'll all be doing bicycles. We'll all be riding bicycles. That may be. That may be true eventually, but it's not feasible to be asking people right now to say, well, you're just going to have to commute to work on your bicycle. No. You know, they live too far away.
No, of course,
you can't do it. So they're going to be 30 miles away. They got to be able to do that in a reasonable period of time. And you know, on a bike, you know, maybe you can do 15 miles an hour if the conditions are good and whatnot. It's flat ground, and so 8, 10 an hour, take you 3 hours. But your car is a mini car, 35 miles an hour, then you could still do that commute. So yeah, you'll be traveling less, maybe less days a week to a large part, but you got to have a means of transportation that will accommodate that. And so that's the best alternative I see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say just as a final point, I would agree with that. But like what I was saying is it's more like an end point. The end point, like as in 20 or maybe 20 years is a bit too close. But, you know, in the long-term future, we can't have that kind of lifestyle. Like you have to sort of think we need to design a system where people are working, like they're living close to their work. You know, I don't think, you know, driving 50 miles in whatever mode of transport is going to be feasible in 50 years. Whether we go electric or we insist on internal combustion engines, I think things like peak oil is just not going to make that happen. So either we manage the solution or nature will take care of the problem for us.
Yeah, you know, the whole concept has to be, you know, rethought. The whole format of living, the design of our culture, you know, which is a car-driven type of environment, that has to disappear. And, you know, the suburbia came about as the result of the invention of the automobile. So the disappearance of the automobile means the disappearance of suburbia. And similarly, you know, suburbia evolved out of cities, okay, where cities became too crowded, too condensed, and so forth. And people who worked in them didn't want to live there, and they weren't conducive to living in any real sense. And so they wanted this area that was right outside the city, suburban, that was close enough to get to, and so forth. Well, now you need to say, well, even that doesn't work anymore. And so what we really need to do is we need to sort of separate into nodes, I would call it. Rather than cities or suburbia, you have to separate out into all nodes that are sort of like small towns that are all connected to each other in a big web. And you can work inside that small town in the types of work that you have to go to that require a personal presence, but then all other types of work are done remotely. And you don't have travel in between these nodes. So you stay most of the time in your hometown, your little small town. I think, but that will take an entire rebuild of the infrastructure, the housing infrastructure. That will take, 50 to 100 years to do that. And it's unlikely at this stage of the game how far along we are. People had thought about this 20 years ago. We started building and raising or destroying, places that are built with the suburban model and putting instead this nodal sort of living in its place. Maybe you could have made that transition smoothly, but that's not going to happen because we're going to break down long before we can rebuild the infrastructure for that. It's just not. That's even less likely than being able to make a transition to EVs. We're lucky if we can do that. So you want to close it because we wanted to talk about trucking as well today and the problems with that, but I think we'll have to save that for a separate broadcast. So you can do the closing.
Yeah. So I totally agree. And this is what I've said often. I mean, you call it nodes. One of the things I like to say is walkable cities. Doesn't have to strictly be cities. I think we're just arguing over semantics here. The basic principle is the same. You need to be within a walkable, cyclable distance, and you just generally stay in that location. I think that's a basic premise here. So yes, I would agree with that. But I think going forward, we will talk about trucking, energy around the world, fracking. These are all other topics that we will look to do in the Collapse Cafe. So for all the diners out there, see you later. Take care and have a great time. Peace.
La pasta, folks.
So I think we could